Okay.
You got the record, Carla?
I do. I hit record.
You told me to remind you.
Thank you. So who are we? My name is Carla Wilkinson, and I am a programming librarian. My physical office is at the main library, and I do a variety of things, public events, programming, summer reading, all that type of stuff. Amber, who are you?
I'm still trying to figure that out, but I am a reference assistant in the local history and genealogy section mostly. I do work out of the reference department. I get roped into a lot of programming and come up with ideas that people say, yeah, you go ahead and do that. So yeah, that's what I do. I'm usually at the main library, but I've been known to hang around at other locations from time to time when needed. So,
exactly.
And these are really awesome pictures of us.
Yeah, so there's me, there's Amber, and oh, there's us. So this is also a tease and a plug for some more programming we're going to have. Amber and I have been spending some time in Springdale Cemetery, and we are going to be recording some videos on Springdale Cemetery that will be released during summer reading this summer. So be on the lookout for those. Okay, so why are we doing this program? We do Peoria Reads. This is the 20th year of Peoria Reads, which is a one city, one book initiative. We want to try to get as many people in Peoria as we can to read the same book. And this year's book is The Library Book by Susan Orlean. This is a nonfiction book. It's a little bit hard to describe, but it's a very good book. It's part mystery, true crime, narrative nonfiction, memoir. It's about the fire at the Los Angeles Public Library in 1986. I believe it was April of 1986 that someone set the library on fire. And they believe they know who did it, but they never arrested anyone for it. And so the author examines the mystery of that fire, but also examines the present day library and what it means to the people of Los Angeles and what libraries mean to people in general. So we wanted to examine our own history of Peoria Public Library. So we're going to focus today, like I said, this is part 2. We're going to focus on the branches, the referendum that happened in 2007, and we're going to go through history in what I'm calling the modern era. And this is from 1968 to the present. If you saw part 1, 1968 is when the current main library building was built, was opened. And in my mind, I guess that marks the divide between the older era and the modern era. So we're just going to go through in this first section the modern history, some highlights since 1970. And the first thing that we come to is bookmobiles. These are some of our bookmobiles. The first one was in 1970. This is the Gersten Slogger, and that is the model, the make of that vehicle. It had a couple of different paint schemes through the years. You'll see in just a second another picture of that vehicle, but it was the first one. And it was purchased with state funds in 1970. It was called Score with Books. I'm not quite sure where that name came from, but that was what it was called. And then in 1986, they upgraded to this Maroney vehicle. The picture you're seeing is from June of 1990, when the library participated in the Proud of Peoria parade. Through the years, our bookmobiles have participated in quite a few parades. And then this is another picture of that Score with Books. So that 1970 Gersten Slogger bookmobile, you can see here it had a different paint scheme, a newer paint scheme. In 1976, for whatever reason, to celebrate the bicentennial, they had an exhibit of pictures of the different bookmobiles. And I chose to show you this picture because it shows this book wagon on the top. This is the only mention we can find of this book wagon. Excuse me, this book wagon. And Amber, do you want to talk about different places that we tried to look for information about
Well,
this?
sure. We went through pretty much every resource that we have in our library. We went through the scrapbooks, the library scrapbooks that we have that are about the library history. And there was lots of mention in the 19-teens about putting books available. But honestly, as I kept reading it, it sounded more like a traveling collection rather than a book wagon. I checked a number of vertical files for these resources and just nothing. I checked the Peoria Anna, I checked multiple resources for library history, and just nothing came up. But it's quite possible that this was maybe not Peoria Public Library. Maybe it was somebody else's, some private library thing or a school library. I couldn't even find this picture amongst our collection.
Right. And to me, that seems very odd. That where would the Journal Star have gotten this picture if it wasn't the library?
So, yeah. But it is a very compelling picture, and we do know that people did do this. I just could not find the expected evidence that it happened in Peoria.
Yes. So while we trace our history with bookmobiles to 1970, quite possibly it goes back much further than that. Okay, some advances in technology. In February of 1975, the library started using tattle tape. Amber, what is tattle tape?
Tattle tape is exactly what it sounds like. It is the security measure that goes into majority, I would say, of our materials, whether they're books, magazines, games. They used to go on videos and DVDs as well. And what it was is it was a basically metallic sensor that was the reason when you left the building, it would go off if it wasn't desensitized. If people tried to take like maybe a reference material that did not check out, so they wanted to kind of sneak it out, it would go off. It was a good way to irritate your coworkers by like sticking a spare piece onto their back as they were leaving the building for lunch, and have it go off and embarrass them. Nowadays, we don't use tattle tape as much. I believe we still use it for some things, but we use RFID tags because it's both security measure and checking out measure in the same piece. So,
and RFID stands for radio frequency identification, and they added those to our collection, I'm gonna say in 2010.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was when we were under construction at the main library, when we remodeled in that time frame. Although as my mom, who was working at the library when this came into effect, yes, I am a legacy. She said it caused a problem with videos because you would have to desensitize the tattle tape without erasing the videos. And I can tell you that caused a few problems when I was working first at the library, because we did have actual VHS tapes, videotapes, and you had to make sure you put it on the right desensitizer.
I'm going to interrupt this slide. Our Deputy Director, Roberta Kashelski, has chimed in explaining that Score with Books was intended to bring library service to an economically depressed area of Peoria and demonstrate that reading could be fun and profitable. So it went along, we're going to talk about in a minute, study centers that were set up at Taft and Warner homes. And so it was to take books into those socioeconomic parts of the city where maybe kids couldn't get to the library. And if you'll remember, if you watched part one or were present for part one, I mentioned that Erastus Wilcox, one of our first librarians, he was our second librarian actually, was very concerned about this in the early 1900s, getting library services to kids in less fortunate parts of the city. So thank you, Roberta.
And I'm pretty sure in the first one we did compare Erastus to Roberta as far as literacy. So it's appropriate that Roberta would have that answer.
She was right on the spot with that. Okay, continuing on, 1980, the library board approved the use of the OCLC link, the first computerized cataloging system. So this would have connected us to other libraries around the country and helped us catalog our books in a more efficient way. I was not around for that, so I cannot elaborate on that anymore.
I was very young, but I'm sure my mom remembers OCLC.
Yes. In October 1984, then they used the first computerized electronic circulation system, and we use computerized circulation systems now. In 1980, big thing happened. If you'll recall, Peoria Public Library was founded in 1880. So in 1980, they had their centennial coming and they decided to form a Friends of the Library group. So you'll see these articles were both from the Journal Star. The one on the left is from February of 1980, saying that they were going to hold a founders meeting to stimulate interest in the Peoria Public Library. And they wanted to help get some programming together to celebrate the centennial. And then shortly thereafter, looks like a week or two after that, they announced their board of directors. And I recognize a few names on here. Deborah York is listed as a member at large. She just retired from the library, I think 2 years ago. She is Deb Dukes now. And so it looks like she was a founding member of the Friends of the Library, which I did not know until I saw this article. You'll notice that annual dues were $8 for a family membership, $5 for an individual, $2 for senior citizens and students. And I think it's $20 now for an individual membership, so still not terribly expensive. I have a whole stack of these old membership cards, and I thought it was interesting to see the back where it says that you can use your card for a 10% discount at any book emporium and Seidler's Hallmark, except for certain things. You can't get a discount on lottery tickets. And also the phone number for the library is a phone number that we don't use anymore. Okay, so the Friends of the Library was launched to help get programming for this centennial celebration. And what they did is they had a banquet, and on the right is the beautiful flyer advertising this banquet. Graphic design has come a long way since then, but you'll see it was at the Continental Regency Hotel, which I believe, Amber, correct me if I'm wrong, is
isn't that that's the one across from because it says Hamilton. It's the one that was
Sheraton.
The one that's across from the courthouse, the federal courthouse.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So the Sheraton was the Continental Regency, and you see it was $13 per ticket. Guest speakers included Alan Dixon, the state librarian, who was the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State also holds the title of state librarian. Mayor Richard Carver and Robert Burhans, the president of the library board. And then featuring winners of the Youth and Arts Week contest. I'm not sure what that was, but here's the program from that banquet. And they featured pictures of the old main library as well as the new 1968 building. The inside of the program also had some pictures of some of the branches.
I think we used that picture of the second, it says interior of second library building.
We did, yes. That would be from the third floor balcony of the old library building. It also included music during this banquet by the Woodruff High School Strings Royale. And there's a full program of all of the different pieces that group played for them. So then the next big historical thing that happened is that Barbara Bush came to the library and read some books to children. She was then the second lady. Her husband was the vice president at that time. She was in Peoria to talk about local efforts to eradicate illiteracy. And this coincided with a presentation of a grant from Secretary of State Jim Edgar for $21,485 to pay for a computer-enhanced literacy program for adults. After that, we had finally, after over 100 years, our first female library director, Maggie Gibbs. She had previously, I believe, been assistant director. And I believe this was when Director Alex Crossman died suddenly. Is that correct, Amber?
Yes, because Alex Crossman died in '86, yes.
Yeah, I think did he have a heart attack?
Yeah, there had been a story that I had heard that he had passed away at the library, but no, he was heavily involved in several organizations. I'm talking like, when I read his obituary, the man was like in 30 different organizations and on the board of like half of them. I'm convinced the guy just never stopped, and his heart was just like, okay, we're done. So
yeah, so Maggie Gibbs followed him as director in 1986. I want to point out also in this picture of her, the painting behind her is a Hedley Waycott painting. I think it's Country Road, Michigan Dunes, or something like that. We still have this painting, and also in our part 1 presentation, there was a picture of Director Xenophon Smith in his office in the 40s or 50s, and you could see this picture on the wall of his office as well.
Next, Hedley.
Next,
we went and found him in Springdale too.
We did find him in Springdale. We're moving into even more advanced technology. This was the Heartland Free Net, and it was, you can see on the right, all the different libraries that it was connected to, and it was designed so that the public could access this electronic mail system. And how it was described to me, you'll see in the bottom left of this newspaper article, it has information categories. And so different organizations could participate and answer questions. So it was kind of like a message board where you see, let's see, lawn and garden Q&A is posted there as an information category. So you could go on and type out your question about lawn and garden, and maybe somebody from Hair Nursery or Kelly Seed or somewhere like that participated in this and would go on and type in an answer to your question. So it was something, it wasn't electronic mail in the sense that you were just sending a message directly to one person. It was more like a message board, what we would think of as a message board.
Or nowadays, Facebook.
Yeah, yeah. There was also, and it's unclear if this was connected to the Heartland Free Net or if it was a separate service, but the library had computers where patrons could come in and send messages to their loved ones serving in the Gulf in the armed forces. And the article said that messages could be received in anywhere from 12 hours to 2 days, instead of the usual 10 days it took for a physical letter to get there. So a lot faster. In one of the articles, it quotes our current Lincoln branch head, Cynthia Smith, talking about sending a message, I believe, to her nephew. So there were lots of people using it to send messages that way to their soldier. Our second female library director, I believe early retirement was offered by the city in 1992. So Maggie Gibbs took early retirement. And our second female library director was Sue Herring. And she got the position in 1992. She had worked for the library for a number of years before that in outreach. So this picture is Sue delivering books to residents in a retirement home. So she had been doing that and became director and was beloved by all, and she's still around somewhere and has been seen in recent years at retirement parties and holiday parties. And then I believe
I think she's afraid we'll make her come back.
Yeah, she took early retirement, I believe, when it was offered in 2003. Okay, now we're really moving into groundbreaking things. In 1996, the library held an Introduction to the Internet program. The picture you see here is the auditorium at the main library, and it is packed. And I wish that you could see a little more clearly what's on the screen up there, because I'm really curious what it looked like. But this is indicative of the type of services, and you'll see as I move along that we're still offering programs like this to introduce our patrons to new types of technology and help them learn how to use these things. Also in 1996, the library got its first public internet workstation. This picture is from a press conference, and the man on the left is Dave Weiss. Dave was the president, treasurer,
All around good guy.
Yeah, all around good guy of the Friends of the Library for a number of years. Dave finally stepped down from the Friends just a few years ago, and he retired and he moved away. And I think that was the only way that Dave was going to not be involved in the Friends, is if he moved away. So, but this is because they had purchased that internet workstation for the library. So that's why he's being interviewed here. And then in 1997, the library got its first website. And if you look closely, the website is what's displayed on that computer screen. So I'm guessing that this was the public internet workstation, maybe, although that doesn't quite look like main library, but I'm not sure.
No, it's main library. Those are the carols we used to have.
Okay. But this is maybe a little after 1997. But you can see the old design of the library website there. So library was just moving very quickly into technology. This next slide is not technology. It's not any great innovation, but I'm including it because something that is talked about a lot in the library book by Susan Orlean is after the fire, when all of these books were covered in water, what do you do? How do you clean this up? In 1999, there was a sprinkler that malfunctioned at the main library. And I believe what happened was it was on a Sunday, and the fire department got an alert that a sprinkler had gone off. And so they got to the library and they didn't want to break in. They probably didn't see smoke or whatever, so they had to wait for Director Sue Herring to show up and unlock the doors. And they didn't know where the sprinkler was going off, so they just had to go through the building until they found it. And I think it was on lower level 1, if I'm correct. And so this article in the Journal Star shows how they had to try to clean up the books afterwards and try to salvage everything that they could. And if you read the library book, it's very interesting how they describe the way that they tried to save all the books from the Los Angeles Public Library. It involved big commercial freezers, because what you want to do is you want to freeze the books immediately so they can't mold. And you put pieces of paper towel between each page to try to absorb as much water as you can. So not sure that that exact method was being used here. And I don't know how many they were able to save, but it's an interesting story.
It's also not the first time we had a water problem in the library. I remember a couple of years after my mom had left working there, and she was working at my school that I was going to at the time. There had been some water damage, and some books were not ruined, but they were water damaged, and they were going to be replaced because the library actually offered them to my mom, because our school didn't have, they were like world books and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
They were getting a replacement copy, and they were still in decent shape. They were, you know, slightly water damaged, but not unsalvageable. So school for the first time was able to have a complete encyclopedia set. And that happened when I was like in 4th or 5th grade. So about 10 years before that.
And we have had some other water issues at the main library, but I think they've finally gotten that figured out. You know, we would occasionally get the really heavy rain and the children's room would flood. But I think they've gotten some drains figured out, and hopefully that doesn't happen again. Okay, next we're moving on to 1999, the pigs. I don't know how many people remember the pigs. This stood for Peoria is Great. You'll recall that the way back at the beginning of this presentation, the most recent Bookmobile had been purchased in 1986. It was a smaller vehicle. So the pigs was a campaign launched to raise money to purchase a new Bookmobile, and they needed to raise $175,000. So inspired by the cows in Chicago that you would see in different places, and they would be painted and decorated, they decided to do pigs. So they bought these fiberglass pigs. They were 5 feet long and 3 feet high, and they sold them to individuals and businesses for $525. And about half of that covered the cost of the pig, and the other half went to the friends of the library, probably, to fundraise for the Bookmobile. There were over 100 pigs. Our counts put us at around 106 maybe that we know of. By November of 2000, they had raised $125,000 towards the $175,000. They had the money from the purchase of the pigs, and they also auctioned some off. So the right-hand picture is a banquet they held where they auctioned some of them off. And of the 106 or so, I can only think of 3 that I know that are still around. There's one on the side of the building at Giorgio Pasquale. There's one in Spotted Cow right in the entryway. And then we believe Walter Brothers Harley Davidson still has theirs as well. So if you see a pig around town, not a live pig, but a fiberglass pig, chances are it came from this program. And so the library got their new Bookmobile. The Caterpillar engine was donated by Caterpillar. The company that made it was Matthews Specialty Vehicles, and it went into service in March of 2002. This is still the Bookmobile we use. It's not been out on the road in a while, but I asked today and they have fired it up recently, so it's still able to run. And this Bookmobile goes to neighborhoods that are maybe not very close to a library location. It goes to schools and daycare centers and lots of different places to take library service to people who might not be able to get to the library on their own. The next great thing that happened is 2011, Local History and Genealogy got their own room.
My home away from home.
Yes, Amber spends a lot of time in that desk right inside the door to the right.
But thankfully, we've replaced those machines that are sitting there. We need a new picture.
We do need a new picture. This picture was taken when the building was renovated in 2011. So these reader printers over here for the microfilm have been replaced by more modern machines. We didn't make a slide for the reader printers because we didn't think everyone else would be as excited about them as we are. Prior to this, Local History and Genealogy had just been in the reference department. And
it was much smaller, smaller, like a third of the size of what we have now, if that, maybe a quarter of the size. This allowed us to spread out to make room for tables, to have computers dedicated to them.
There's a lot of stuff in closed stacks behind that room as well. And so you have really
much more easily accessible too.
Yeah, exactly. All of the vertical files and picture files are back there. And lots of other resources that we don't have out in the open are back there too. So a really great thing to give our local history genealogy department its own space. It's probably our most valuable resource.
Oh yeah, because I work there.
Exactly, yes. I highlighted a few people in the first presentation. I want to highlight Betty Roberson here. Betty started working for the library, I believe, in 1950. I think that's correct.
Yes.
So on the left is Betty in her later years, and on the right, you'll see Betty. She's the woman on the left in this picture on the right, and this is Betty in the old main library at the reference desk. Betty was considered a human reference desk. She could answer a question faster than a computer. They had a race once, and Betty won. She beat the computer. And what did she create for us? The question file?
She created the question file. So when people would call or they'd come in and ask questions that might be general knowledge for some, she would create a card to give others a quicker way to that. I mean, it's what we would, think of for like a Google page now, where a lot of times one of my favorite things to do is that I had somebody who called me and said, there was this explosion down at one of the homes back like in the 60s. And that was all I had to go on. And when I went and looked in the question file, sure enough, there was a card that gave me a date of when this explosion happened. And I was able to look it up on microfilm and get the whole story for this person.
So would you say the question file is more Peoria?
It's all Peoria.
It's all Peoria related stuff. So things that Betty probably just knew. And boy, her mind must have been something else.
Steel trap, man.
Yeah, Betty retired in 2002, I believe. And she passed away shortly after. In 2011, some of our reference.
She passed in 2003 because
2003. It's on the plaque right there.
Yeah, no, but we dedicated the collection in 2011 to her.
Correct.
Because the thing was, she had worked, like we said, for over 50 years in the library, and she was just an amazing resource. And I know she retired not long after I started there, because it was the first retirement party held after I started working there. And people are like, oh, you should go to this. And I'm like, I don't know who this is. I'm not going, not even for free food. And it was a really sad day when we got the news a few months later that she had passed away.
I think you and Betty would have gotten along pretty well.
Oh, maybe that's maybe I'm the new Betty.
Maybe.
I'd never be as good as her though. So
no, you're gonna have to create a new resource for us to be as good as Betty. So this
no pressure.
The initiative to name the collection after her was taken on by some of the fellow reference staff, people who had worked with Betty for a long time, said we need to honor her in some way. So if you're in the local history department, there is a plaque on the end panel of one of the stacks there, and you can read about all of Betty's accomplishments. So moving on, more technology. We had an introduction to the internet program. In 2012, we taught people about e-readers. And this was a program I did. And it's just, it's a response to people calling and asking questions. If enough people call and ask us about something, that tells us that we probably need to do something about it. So we had a program where we talked about all the different types of e-readers. I had representatives from Best Buy and Barnes & Noble come talk about the different devices, because I don't think I had one yet at this point. And we had, this picture doesn't do it justice, but I think there were something like 175 people crammed into the Mackenzie room at the North Branch and spilling out into the entryway. So that was definitely a necessary program. And we did several other programs on e-readers as well. And so now this brings us to the modern time. What are we dealing with now? The library in a pandemic. On the left is me delivering books to patrons curbside. And I was informed today that it was exactly a year ago today that we started doing curbside service. So we closed March
16th, because it was right
16th.
before.
Yeah,
Right
it was
before
right before
the
St. Patrick's Day. Yeah. So March 16th, we didn't have any library services really other than online until May 6th. And so we were running books out to cars for a limited time in the afternoon, but we were really, really busy. I was helping out at North Branch, and so I decided to throw on a cape and make the best of it. And so it was an interesting time. And then on the right is a picture of bags stuffed with summer reading prizes. Before the pandemic hit, we had purchased, well, the friends for us purchased a lot of prizes for summer reading because we had a plan, we had a theme, we were going to hand out weekly prizes to people, and then we couldn't do that. So Alice Jackson and I spent hours in a meeting room at the main library stuffing bags full of prizes, and then we shipped them out to branches, and by the time summer reading was over, people were able to come in and pick up a bag of prizes. So we don't ever want to have to do that again, or if we do have to do it, we're going to come up with a better process. Other things that we've had to do over the last year is change how we do programs. For instance, what we're doing right now, we're doing a virtual program, and some of them work really well, some don't. It's different for different age groups. A story time, a virtual story time is not probably as effective as an in-person story time. So we're starting some outdoor story times this month. It's just really changed how we have to think about how we deliver services to our patrons. And
we've done a lot of, we've increased our virtual presence as far as like answering questions virtually. I mean, we already did that a lot in local history because as somebody who works with other genealogists, we've got plenty of people from all over the US and sometimes beyond who cannot just come into the library because they don't live nearby, not because we're in a pandemic. So we saw a lot of increase of that. I think our digital collections saw exponential growth.
Yes. And we added digital magazines this year as well, so that people can access those virtually. We've done a lot more videos. I think that's what's inspired you and I to do videos about Springdale Cemetery. You spent a lot of time in Springdale Cemetery getting to know the cemetery and discovering things there. Okay, so that kind of brings us.
Alice makes a good point in the chat that because we can do virtual programming, people that aren't local can attend these events as well.
People from California and North Carolina. I believe Roberta in her nonfiction and biography book club has a book club member who had moved away and couldn't come to book club anymore. But now that they're virtual, that woman can come to the book club again, even though she doesn't live in the area. So there are good things about this. There are certainly bad things, but there are some positives that we're finding. All right. So now we're going to talk about branches, and we're going to go back in time a little bit, but I thought this was the best way to structure this. We're going to talk about all the branches and the outreach that the library has done throughout its history. The very first outreach, we find some mention of deposit collections in schools in the late 1890s. So the library was established in 1880. Less than 20 years later, they were already having deposit collections in schools and doing outreach. On March 28th, 1903, they established probably what we would call a deposit collection at the Congregational Church Mission School, which was on Washington Street. And if we look at old maps, you can see a mission labeled there. So we know where it was. And then in 1909, Manual Training High School let the library use a room to have a branch, what they considered a branch, and they called this Lincoln branch. Until the actual Lincoln branch opened in 1911. It is a Carnegie building. we will talk a lot more about Lincoln Branch in part 3 of our history programs. So I really encourage you to come back for that one. We could do an entire program just on Lincoln Branch and the history there and the fascinating way that came about. Andrew Carnegie would give these grants to communities to build library buildings, and you can view all of the documents, all of the letters that went back and forth between Peoria and Andrew Carnegie's personal secretary about how this building was established. So this is actually from, I think it says June 10th. So this is about 6 days before the building opened. And these are just cute pictures we have of some reading clubs in the 50s at the Lincoln Branch. And we have a lot more pictures, but like I said, we're going to talk about Lincoln Branch a lot more in part 3. The next branch that opened was the East Bluff Branch. Oh, I need to do a poll. I'm doing things out of order. So I'm going to launch this poll, and it's 2 questions. The first one is, what library branch was your favorite? So if you visited a library branch that's no longer open, what was your favorite? And then the second question is, which library location do you visit the most now? So I'm gonna send out these questions, and you can go ahead and vote on those and let us know. Okay, we have a few votes coming in. It's divided pretty even. Oh, West Bluff is.
I would like to express my displeasure that I am not allowed to vote.
Sorry. Okay. I think I've allowed enough time. So West Bluff got a lot of love there. Let's see. So everyone can see the results. And then the current location, pretty evenly divided, but North Branch got a little more votes.
I'm pretty sure River West and Southside 2 are the only 2 of those that I visited as libraries. And Southside 2 was only visited as once. So I can't really make a fair comparison. And I guess I can't really answer which library location do you visit the most now, because I go to the main library 5 days a week.
Yeah. Okay, so the East Bluff Branch, you may recognize this building. This was the Smith Drug Building, and this is on the corner. This building is still standing. I'm going to show you some current pictures in a second if you don't already recognize it. It's on the corner of Knoxville and McClure. So it was, the drugstore was right on the corner, and the library was kind of in an L shape in the back parts of the building, and they had 2 entrances. One was called the children's entrance. I think this is on the Knoxville. This is the main entrance side. On the Knoxville side. So this is the children's entrance now, and you can kind of see on the window there, it says children's room. And then this is the back of the building. Over on the right-hand side, this woman all the way over on the right who's staring straight at the camera, that's Felicia Ryan. Again, if you saw the first session, you'll remember I talked about Felicia Ryan. She worked for the library from 1926 to 1970. So this is probably shortly after she started working for the library. And according to her obituary, Felicia Ryan worked at every branch of the library. This is the East Bluff Branch today. If you didn't know what building I was talking about, hopefully you do now. The Knoxville side is on the left. You can see the shadows of windows up on the top floor. And then on the right is the McClure side, and you can really see the outlines of where the windows and the doors were. So all the way on the right and the back of that building, you can see where the children's entrance would have been. In 1930, the library started offering services to the Municipal Tuberculosis Sanitarium. You can see on the left, they had a cart they could take to rooms, and on the right, they did have a library in the sanitarium. The picture on the right came from the Historical Society collection at Bradley University Library. If you don't know, the sanitarium was out where Forest Park Nature Center is. There is one building closer to the park entrance. It's a big brick building. I think there is like an accountant's office or something in it.
Accounts or investments, one of the two.
Something like that. And then further back in that corner is a big building that's now the home of Samaritan Ministries, and that was part of the sanitarium as well. In 1937, McClure Branch opened. It was originally called East Bluff Branch, so they closed that location on the corner of Knoxville and McClure and moved it to the current location of the McClure Branch, but they didn't call it McClure until November of 1943. And we're not really sure why, but that's what they did.
I imagine it got called McClure simply because it was on McClure, much like when we initially were talking about building the North Branch. We just called it the North Branch because we didn't know where we were going to put it. And then when we finally found a place, there was actually discussion, what should we name it? And everybody's like, the North Branch.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
So maybe patrons just started referring to it as McClure. And so they thought, well, let's just call it McClure. And this is a beautiful old picture of that building. It's
also designated as a CILF landmark building.
It's a Central Illinois Landmark Foundation building. These pictures are 1987 when they had a 50th anniversary party at McClure, and the tiny lady on the left in the red coat in the middle and the fur hat is Felicia Ryan, who you saw in those pictures from 1926.
Well, and isn't that Deb York Duke? Next to her?
It is. That is Deb, right
founding
next to Felicia Ryan. And then behind Deb is Cynthia Smith, current head of the Lincoln Branch. So no one tells Cynthia that we showed this picture of her in her 1987 hair. And then next to her is Mary. She was probably, would she have been Hardaway at the time?
I think she was Hardaway at this point.
Ortiz, who was a children's librarian for a long time at McClure and then Lincoln, and just retired about a year and a half ago and moved to Florida. So we miss Mary a lot. The next branch was the Wilcox Branch. This building still exists and it's a private home now. So I don't really want to tell you where it is. If you know where it is, then you know where it is. But I don't want to advertise it because I don't want anyone going and knocking on these people's door. And of course, it was named after Erastus Wilcox, the second librarian of Peoria Public Library. It was open from 1940 to 1971. And it's in Averyville, I will give you that much. So kind of the north end up the river. And it was built around the time that Averyville officially became part of Peoria. And it was kind of an agreement between the city and Averyville that, look, we'll give you a library if you open. So, and I think it looks like a really cool building. And here are some interior pictures of the Wilcox Branch. Beautiful shelves. I am a little jealous that it's a private home now. I would love to live in a library building. In fact, somewhere on the East Coast, there's a house for sale for, I think, millions of dollars somewhere that used to be an old Carnegie Library building. So if anyone would like to pool all of their money together with me and move out to the East Coast, we could share a Carnegie Library building.
But you would take all the places for the books. I've seen your book collection.
That's true. Yes. This was very interesting. Something I didn't know until I started doing this research is that the library had these neighborhood stations, as they called them. They had books available for checkout in 2 different Kroger stores. So one was on Adams Street, and that was eventually replaced by the Southside branch, and another was on Prospect. I'm not entirely sure which picture which location this picture is. And you can see it was only for about 5 years, and I'm not sure, what was the thinking behind that? What was
I would think it was Neighborhood Station 1, because we
Okay.
went to where Neighborhood Station 2 was, and I don't think the building is that big.
That's true. Yeah. But I think it's funny how, right next to the produce, people are browsing books.
Well, bananas and books, what's better?
Yep. So neighborhood station number 2, this is a current view. It's currently the home of Winner's Circle on Prospect. So next to the old Treskers is where this one is. That was a Kroger on Prospect. 1950, the West Bluff branch opened. The address was 1704 Main Street. That was a pre-1956 address. In 1956, the city reconfigured addresses. But we have cross-references to figure that out. So the current address would be 827 Main Street, and that is a parking lot. So we did not take a picture of that. West Bluff moved in 1954 to 97 University Street. And I'll give you a second to think about where that is.
Oh, I don't know. A bunch of the people like the West Bluff branch. They should know.
They should know. It's Avanti's. So if you look carefully in the left-hand picture, you'll see that there is a set of double windows kind of above the door. And then if you look at the picture of Avanti's, you can see that set of double windows kind of to the right of the carryout door. So that's where the library was. Yes, Bobby Rice knew it was Avanti's. So just the next time you're getting carryout from the Maine and University Avanti's, imagine that you're in a library.
Well, I imagine you can't smell the books over the Avanti's.
That's true. In 1951, the Prospect branch opened. And one of our favorite coworkers, Stacy, lived in the Heights, and this was her local library. She has fond memories of it. You'll see it's mostly parking lot now because the building would have gone most of the way to the corner here. And Stacy told us that the left-hand door was the library and the right-hand door was the doctor's office. And her mother would take her there and drop her off in the library and then go next door for her doctor's appointment and just leave Stacy in the library with the librarians. So
we don't recommend leaving your children with librarians.
We don't want you to leave your children and go run errands, but I imagine that might have happened a lot at the Prospect branch. Oh, Jeff is very excited. Your first library. I have heard lots of good things about the Prospect branch. This is the last day for the Prospect branch, August 31st, 1973. It was also the last day for the West Bluff branch. So I can't recall the names of these ladies. I believe the right-hand side also shows some board members, and maybe librarian Bill Bryan is in the middle there. But they closed those because in 1974, well, let me slow down. 1954, the South Side opened. I love this picture on the left-hand side with the boy with his bicycle. And then on the right-hand side, I like this picture for different reasons, because it seems like we're constantly asking children to pose and look cute for pictures. And these boys did not want to pose and look cute for a picture. They probably just wanted to play and get on with what they were doing, and they got roped into taking a picture. But it looks like they were celebrating Children's Book Day, and so they wanted some pictures of smiling kids reading books. And even today, kids are not cooperative. This is where the former South Side was. So if you look at that sidewalk going right up the center of the picture, that's the sidewalk to the door to the library. And there's a liquor store next to it. And I've heard stories from a couple of different people who worked in this South Side location at one time that they had a very good relationship with the liquor store, and they would kind of watch out for each other. And I believe it was Roberta said that they had an agreement that if there was any trouble, they could just knock on the wall, either the library or the liquor store. If they had any trouble, they could just knock on the wall between the two stores, and the other place would call the police or come help them or whatever. So it's still a liquor store. I don't know if it's the same people who own it, probably not, but it's interesting that it's still there. And I wonder if they've expanded into the library space.
Road trip.
And here is what Roberta was talking about earlier with Score with Books. These study centers opened up in Taft and Warner homes. On the left is Warner, and I can't recall this lovely librarian's name, but I love this picture.
Mildred Palmer?
I think you're
Does
right.
that sound right?
I think you're right. Yes, I think you're right. How did you pull that out?
It's in my notes.
Okay. I love this picture because I love this girl's outfit. I love her tall socks and her beautiful skirt and her sweater, and maybe it was posed, but it looks like she was just standing there reading. On the right is a pamphlet that was handed out to people to tell them what the study center was for. You can see it was open Monday through Thursday in the late afternoon and evenings, and then all day on Saturday. And those were open, I'm not sure how many years, but I don't think it was a terribly long time. Okay, so 1974, remember I said that West Bluff and Prospect closed on the same day. And we assume it was because Lakeview branch was going to open. And it took them a couple of years to get Lakeview built. There was some issue with the stone on the outside of the building, maybe some issues with contractors, but eventually they opened in September of 1974. And we don't have pictures of the inside in 1974, but we do have some older pictures from before it was expanded. So on the right-hand side, this is where you would be looking, I believe, towards the children's section, and the big story time room that's there now is not present in this picture. The building had not been expanded outward at that point. You can also see that you can check out a record from the library and probably some other things that you can't check out anymore.
All the videos are in there too.
And here, oh my goodness, how did this picture get in here? On the left, we have a young new librarian working at her first post in the Lakeview branch. This is Deputy Director Roberta Kashelski, young and fresh-faced and bright-eyed, and not yet having worked 30-some years in the library.
Yeah, because she didn't notice we got the shackles on her quick.
Yeah.
We were keeping her.
Yeah. So I do have a little bit more information about Lakeview in here, just because I received some more questions. Roberta, you didn't recognize yourself. Oh my goodness, that was you. I had some questions about the owl on the outside of the Lakeview branch. It was purchased from an artist in Michigan for $1,000. The newspaper article is a little vague about how exactly this happened, and maybe it wasn't very clear how it happened. A board member was supposed to go to Michigan and bring back a scale model to show the board to see if they would want to purchase this. Instead, the board member brought back the huge full-sized piece of artwork because the artist had just felt the artistic juices flowing through him and decided to go ahead and make it. And so the library kind of said, okay, I guess we're going to buy it. So they bought it, and then they had to figure out how to mount it on the building. And so it's worked out. I think we've gotten over any ill effects that we felt about being stuck with the owl. I think a lot of people really enjoy it and are endeared to it now. And this is Library Director Alex Crossman with the owl. And I think we still have those same flatbed carts at the library.
Oh, I know we do. I tripped over one today. Yes, we still have those.
I just recognized that. In May of 1986, the library received a grant from the state of Illinois to expand the library. And this is a picture from when they announced that grant. You can see on the left who was there at the time.
Now this is only 12 years after Lakeview was first built.
Correct.
So that's how much this branch was needed and how overtaxed it was, really, and why we had this need to expand it, you know, just over a decade after we had built it.
Yes, and keep in mind that this was the northernmost library in the city until the North Branch was open. So even right before the North Branch was open, Lakeview was the busiest location. And here are a couple of pictures from the expansion. They expanded the front and the back. So where all the main stacks are for the adult books in Lakeview, that part was all added on. And like I said earlier, the story time room was added onto the front as well. And there was some staff space added onto the back. So it really probably basically doubled the size of the building. 1997, they opened the new Southside branch. And this was in Harrison Homes. Correct me if I'm wrong. They basically took, I think, 4 housing units from the PHA. And yes, I am correct, Harrison Homes. They took 4 housing units and turned them into a library. And at first they only had the first floor completed. So they opened that and then they worked on the second floor, and they were able to do events, programs, story times on the second floor. They had to add an elevator to the outside of the building so that they could get up to the second floor. And all of the children, I've heard this story many, many times, all the children who would come to Southside for programs would ask, when is that alligator going to be done? Because they couldn't say elevator. So the elevator at Southside is the alligator. And then it closed in 2007. 2002 to 2011, there was a branch at the River West houses. And this is the best picture of River West I could find. Surely we have some more. But I believe it was basically kind of an extension of the outreach department, because we have some outreach staff in this picture from the ribbon cutting. We also have John Morris, who was either a library board member or city council member at the time, now the head of the Riverfront Museum. Other outreach we've done throughout the years, on the left, St. Jude. They did a puppet program at St. Jude for some of the patients there. That's Sue Herring on the right behind the puppet stage, and Joanne Coates on the left. And then retirement homes also on the right. And we still do things like this. Of course, our outreach department goes to retirement homes. Not so much right now, but we do have deposit collections at retirement homes, and they can go and visit homebound patrons and deliver materials directly to them. And
didn't you say that Katie does some stuff now?
Yes, yeah. Katie at Lakeview, of course, I don't know how much she's doing it right now. There is a facility called Almost Home that's kind of a bridge for juvenile hospital patients, so children who are ready to leave the hospital but not quite ready to go home. So it's kind of a step facility for patients, so that they're not living in the hospital anymore, but they're still getting care they need. It's called Almost Home, and Katie at the Lakeview branch has been there a little bit to do some programming with those kids. So we're still doing things like the outreach that you see displayed here. And on the right, again, Sue Herring, and the woman on the left in that picture on the right is Florence Lilly. And she must have worked for outreach for a time, because she appears in quite a few pictures like this. And another interesting thing is hospital outreach. On the left, they're demonstrating to this young lady who seems to be confined to her bed. This was a special projector that could project books on the ceiling, so that patrons who couldn't sit up and hold a book could still read something that was projected on the ceiling.
So our first e-readers?
Possibly, yeah. It's certainly a digital, well, kind of digital. It's a projected book, I guess. So
It's an
maybe
e-book. It's an electronic book.
it is, yeah. On the right is Proctor Hospital. It looks like nurses are reading. Hospital service actually began in 1925, so there's been a long history of hospital services. And I think, yes, that brings us to the next section, and this is the next to last section. I promise I don't have 50 more slides to show you, maybe just like 45 or so. We're going to talk about updating facilities. So referendums. In 2007, 72% of Peoria voters agreed to advise the city council to issue $35 million in bonds to renovate the existing buildings and add a branch. The 1965 referendum to build the current main library building was for $3.2 million for one building, and that would be over $24 million today. So we spent 35 on 5 different locations. This image on the right is people who helped with the fundraising received this, I guess it's a paperweight with the 72% on it, because they were just, the library was so thrilled that it passed by such a high number. So how do you move a library? One book
Same way you eat
at
an
a time.
elephant.
One book at a time. I believe these images are from when parts of the main library were completed. When the main library was being renovated, library services moved to lower level 2, and they basically operated the library out of the auditorium. And so when the first and second floors were completed and they had to move all the materials up there, they had to move out of the auditorium. I think this is a temporary wall we're seeing in the auditorium.
No, that used to be, I think, the front.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. And you can see that the carts all have numbers on them, and I see as high as 35. I'm sure there were more. So,
well, we had 2 rounds. Notice that there's pink and yellow and green.
Oh, okay.
And what we did is we only had access to one elevator.
Yeah,
and
you
so,
explain it. I wasn't there.
Well, we only had access to one elevator out of the 2 we had in the building at the time. And yeah, the cart brigade, Alice, remember what we called it. And so the people that were working, we were closed for 6 weeks at the main library, and we would load the books up on the carts, and you were either on like team pink or team green, and you worked with your team the whole day so that you didn't get confused, and the carts were numbered in order. So that's how they were stacked. And we would only put books on the top shelf, because putting them on the second or even third shelf got to be backbreaking for those of us who were, moving them, which I think we initially started with 20 for each team. And then we had to start, we started using, you see the gray ones there. They were actually carts that were meant to be taken out to the North Branch. And we realized we weren't going to be able to move them fast enough. So we used the new carts to move the books. And so we had to buy new carts for the North Branch, because by the time we got done moving the books, it was very obvious they had been well used.
And you use a lot of those old wooden carts as well, which
still exist in corners of the library.
Yes, but probably don't roll quite as well. Everyone has their favorite book cart. And some of them, like, you just know by looking at it how nicely it's going to roll.
It's like getting the right cart at Walmart,
Yeah, I would not pick one of those wooden carts. That would not be my choice. And then the picture on the right, did we say that this was lower level 1, I think?
This is lower level 2.
Lower level 2, okay.
Where this is actually where that cage kind of area, I'm pretty sure, is open now as far as like a hallway. The open area where these shelving units are, I have to orient myself in the building, I think is where the room that the board uses, the conference room. Yeah.
Yep, lower level 2 conference room. Okay, interesting.
It's been a year since we've used the rooms. I can't remember their names.
I know. Yeah. So how do you move a library? One book at a time, very carefully. Oh, and I think our next slide is a special surprise.
Oh.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So this is, if you don't have sound on your computer, just imagine. This is how you scare library staff. So Amber, please tell us what we just saw.
Well, this is when this is a vision of the first floor. The wall, the black wall in the background is now the wall between our security office and our lounge. The new entrance is all the way to the left, which has been expanded on. But in order to create the light well that is between the second and first floor, they had to cut out the floor in between them. And so they had these tires to catch these 500-pound bricks that they were cutting. But staff was still 2 floors down in the basement, now lower level 2. And it was very rough working down there when you'd hear these massive weights.
Did you know it was coming?
We knew that they were going to be doing it, but I don't think you think about how 500 pounds of concrete landing on tires and then falling off those tires.
Mm-hmm.
We had dealt with other noises before that, but this was really the day that you were going, oh my goodness, should I be texting my mom my last will and testament because the floor is going to drop through on me?
Yeah.
And it was very startling because you wouldn't hear anything and then suddenly boom.
And I was at Lakeview at the time and we heard all about this from people. Oh my goodness, you'll never guess what they were doing. It was so loud. Oh my goodness, it was so loud. I thought the ceiling was going to cave in. So news traveled very quickly.
And our patrons didn't know necessarily.
Oh yeah.
We were still open for limited services.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd hear this magnificent boom. Mm-hmm. And patrons would be looking at us like, what was that? Yeah, they're tearing down the building over us. So
yeah. Okay. So this is the roof of the building. This is that skylight that got installed. And this was a big deal to a lot of people because that building just doesn't have a lot of windows. And so to get natural light, especially on the second floor, was a really momentous thing. So I just had to include a picture of the skylight. So after all this construction and renovation, on May 14th, 2011, the North Branch opened. And I should add that next week, the North Branch will be celebrating their 10-year anniversary all week long. So you can stop in the North Branch and participate in some activities, get a commemorative bookmark. They're also, because the 10th anniversary is traditionally the tin anniversary, TIN tin, they will be collecting canned goods to donate to the Peoria Area Food Bank. So very excited about the North Branch. And then the main library reopened in June of 2011. And again, there's a picture of that beautiful skylight.
And that open area, that's what they were dropping.
Yes. So
that's what they were dropping onto the tires.
I believe it's 15 feet square. December of 2011, Lincoln Branch opened. And I play favorites. Lincoln Branch is my favorite. I think it is so beautiful, especially this staircase here. The staircase takes you up into the Carnegie building where the adult nonfiction is. And then everything else is located on this lower, newer part. of the library, but I think it's just beautiful. The color of the wood in there, it just feels like a really warm, inviting place. So if you've never been to Lincoln Branch, I really recommend that you go and just look around and enjoy that building.
Except not on Wednesdays. They're closed on Wednesdays.
Not on Wednesdays, that's correct. In 2012, January of 2012, McClure Branch reopened. We couldn't do a lot to McClure Branch. We can't expand it at all because it's surrounded by a park. It's also kind of a floodplain. So they couldn't change a whole lot about that building, but my favorite part probably is the window seats that they were able to add. And then in April of 2012, Lakeview Branch reopened.
After their third renovation.
Their third renovation, yeah. Actually, yeah, because they had redone the entryway at one point also. In the early 2000s, I believe they redid the entryway. So yes, Lakeview Branch has been through several different renovations. The picture on the right is above the self-check. Originally, there was a Skylight in Lakeview. And then I think in their second renovation, they closed off the Skylight. So then in 2012, they opened the Skylight back up again. So we librarians really like sunlight. We don't get to see a lot of it, so we really appreciate it when it's there. So our last section is I wanted to talk about some of the things that we have kept around to remember the history of the library. Some are very large, some are not very large. The first one here is the owl. So on the left is a picture of the roof of the original 1897 library building, and you can see the owl right there in the center. There was some controversy at the time that the building was torn down that some board members said, we don't need to save that owl. We don't need to be spending money to save that could be spent to add windows to the new library. I believe that's exactly what they said. They compared it to adding windows to the library. Well, they didn't add windows anyway, as we know. And so they did save the owl because I believe the librarian pointed out that the public would be very upset if they didn't.
Oh yeah, there was going to be public outcry.
Mm-hmm. So in 1970, Nita Sunderland installed it in the stairwell. And you can see her there on the right, installing it. It did
on scaffolding.
On scaffolding. So I took the picture on the left so you can see just how high it is in the stairwell. So she had to have had scaffolding built up to stand on to install this. And there's a little plaque next to it or below it that tells you what it is. And the winged lions. They have names, Erastus and Xenophon, after two former librarians, and you can see them on the picture on the left, sitting at either end of the library roof. They currently live right outside of the local history genealogy department, and Nita Sunderland also cleaned and
those were redone for our 125th anniversary.
Okay. So in 2005.
Yeah, they were brought out, and it was one of the first times I ever aggravated Jenny Severe, the manager of the reference collection, because I refused to call them winged lions. I called them winged. And I said winged enough that she actually said winged in a board meeting.
Oh no.
She was quite annoyed with herself. But they actually used to live near in the video where the black wall was. Now they actually lived there initially.
They were at the entrance.
Yes. Yeah. They were just to the side of the entrance where we had a book sale room.
So now they're by local history and genealogy, and we think that's a good spot. These beveled glass windows. This is kind of the best picture we have. And let me see if I can get out my pointer here. That they were down here around the front entrance is where we believe those would have been. And so now they're on the second floor. And it was, gosh, probably a little over 5 years ago, we had these cleaned and fixed up, and they are now on the second floor in the main library near the Monroe room. So near the parking lot, the entrance side of the second floor. Beautiful beveled glass windows.
And that was a project to mount those as well.
Yeah, I wasn't around, but it doesn't look easy. This is a Shakespeare quote. I pointed it out in the first presentation. Down here in this picture of the old main library, it would have been right above the reference desk. It's a quote from Titus Andronicus. A lot of things were salvaged from the old main library, and as is the case in a lot of construction sites, the contractor would have had control over what happened to the stuff. So a lot of things were sold off. And this actually ended up in the possession of Theogene Kenyon and Les Kenyon. And several years ago, she donated it back to us. And it's now in a meeting room on lower level 2 of the main library, and that's the room where our board meets. This is a doorknob that's displayed in the director's office. We don't know exactly what door this doorknob came off of. I think it's just assumed that it came from the main library.
It's probably the one Felicia wanted.
Yes.
Maybe she donated it back.
That's the story I have in my mind. Felicia Ryan, according to a newspaper article, wanted the doorknob from the back door of the main library. That's all she wanted when the library was going to close. And so in my mind, this is the doorknob that Felicia Ryan got, because I really hope she got her doorknob. This is also in the director's office. It's a holosteric barometer. When the library opened, they received a lot of gifts. And this one, in the center, you can kind of see it's like gold writing, etching. It says presented to Peoria Public Library by Walter Wyatt, February 11th, 1897. Walter Wyatt owned, I believe it was the Peoria Optical Company. And
I didn't take the notes on that.
I don't know at that time what an optical company would have done exactly. It's possible that he would have done something like making something with glass like this, or maybe he just purchased it. We don't know for sure, but it's still there. It still works as far as we know, and it's a really beautiful piece. It's about the size of a dinner plate. It's actually pretty large, maybe a luncheon plate. This we keep in our vault. It's some marble facing, the handwritten note. You can see what it says there on the left, that it was given by the head custodian, Joseph Nuttall, to the board president and presented to the board in 1969. So I'm picturing this custodian sneaking down to the construction site, taking this piece of marble to keep. And so we have it. My goal is maybe next year to have a display of all these old things from the old library. John Lee, he was the first president of, basically the president of the board. So in that bottom left-hand picture, you can see that's the old library, and you can see his bust there. It would have been a gift to the library, I believe, by his family. And that is his grave marker in Springdale Cemetery. And he now sits outside of the auditorium on lower level 2 at the main library. And he's quite a detailed bust as well, I would say. This is the Mercantile library desk. We don't know a whole lot about it. What we know is basically from this newspaper article we found that Bill Bryan, the librarian for a long time, had it refinished. It's a very interesting desk. On the right-hand side, those are all drawers. It looks like drawers on the left-hand side, but they don't open, kind of false drawer fronts. And then the top lifts up. And the only reference we have that it was a Mercantile desk is from this newspaper article. We don't see it in any pictures from the Mercantile library, but we don't have a lot of pictures from then. But it's really a beautiful little desk. And inside are little drawers and cubbies, and there are these gavels. And the gavels were made from railing of the old library building by a man named Paul Borscheit. And he just donated them to the library. We don't know the history of the letter in there. I believe it's from 1918. We don't really know the history of it or why it's in
I
there.
think we kind of looked up the people, but we couldn't find necessarily a library
we couldn't
connection.
figure out the connection, so we don't know why that's in there, but we're just going to leave it in there. I don't know about the book shaped box. We don't know why that's in there, but we're just going to leave it in there. The ceramic tile was made as a commemorative piece at some point. There are several of those floating around. And then there are these book plates that say Peoria Public Library is the owner of this volume. Probably pretty old book plates because we don't use those anymore and haven't for a long, long time. So just a neat old desk. And I believe that takes us to the end. Yeah. So at this time, if you have any other questions or comments or anything you'd like to share, we have a couple of minutes. If anyone has anything they'd like to share, I will invite you back for part 3 on June 10th, where we're going to cover curses, scandals, riots, and controversies.
It's gonna be scandalous.
It will be. And that's where we will really dive into the Lincoln branch and talk about the city cemetery that was on that location and the history behind that. We've been diving deep into some primary source materials and trying to figure out the real story behind all of that. Curses, scandals, and riots will leave up to your imagination, but there have been a few things that have happened over the years that are interesting in library history. And you can find that on our Facebook page. If you need the link to that, if you're not a Facebook user, you can email us. I believe you can just reply to the email that you got when you signed up for this session. And then I think that comes to me and I can get you that link to part 3. So if there are no more questions, I am going to stop recording